Mengele was in charge of our life and was in charge of the death of our parents. Be able to create, he wanted to play God.
Dumnezeu n-a fost. I se spunea în schimb îngerul morții. Când punea ochii pe cineva, însemna că e sfârșitul. În 1944, Eva și Miriam Moses aveau 10 ani și impresia că pot copilări la nesfârșit pe dealurile satului lor de lângă Cluj.
Life was very peaceful in our Romanian farm. My mother was a homemaker and my father was a farmer. We owned a lot of land. He was out in the field every day.
Însă brusc, într-o dimineață de martie, un ofițer ungur i-a trezit din somn, le-a spus să-și ia niște lucruri și să iasă imediat din casă. Dincolo, la șimleul Silvaniei, se întâmpla același lucru.
We were ordered to leave all our personal belongings behind because they are taking us to a place in Hungary that will have everything we needed. There was no room to sit, we were all standing. My childish curiosity, as we were standing there, I looked around trying to figure out what this place was when I realized that my father and 2 older sisters disappeared in the crowd. Never ever did I see them again. As we were holding on to my mother for dear life, a Nazi was running and yelling in German, Zwillinge, Zwillinge, twins, twins. We looked very similar and we were always dressed alike. And he demanded to know if we were twins. And my mother didn't know what to say. She asked if that was good and the Nazi nodded yes. And my mother said yes.
Copiii în cabinetul Iosef Mengele, unde a început transformarea lor din oameni în numere.
They heated the needle over the flame of a lamp. And when the needle got hot, they dipped it into ink and they burned into my left arm, dot by dot. So my number is capital A-7063. My twin sister's number was capital A-7064. We were taken to a lab where we were ordered to sit naked on benches, and they measured different parts of my body. They compared it to my twin sister, and then they compared it to charts. So those experiments were always on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and they could last up to 8 hours a day. The other thing, they would take as much blood until the child would faint, and then they would stop. So they wanted to know how much blood a person can lose and still live. That probably had important value for them on the battlefield. Teenagers, they have been involved in some bizarre experiments. They would do cross blood transfusion between a boy twin and a girl twin to see if they could make a boy into a girl and a girl into a boy. For that purpose, they would also castrate boys to see if they could make them into girls. On the other days, they would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, and they would take a lot of blood from my left arm. At the same time, they would give me a minimum of 5 injections into my right arm. Those injections, they contain germs, diseases, and drugs. And as it turned out, those were the deadly ones. And after a few days, I developed a very high fever, the swelling in my arms and legs, and the huge red spot. The next visit to the blood lab, they didn't tie my arms. Instead of that, measure my fever. And I was immediately taken to the hospital. The hospital was another barrack, but it was filled with people who looked to me more dead than alive. Next morning, Mengele came in with 4 other doctors, never ever examined me. He looked at my fever chart, and then he declared, "Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." I knew he was right, but I refused to die. So I made a silent pledge that I will prove Mengele wrong. I will survive and be reunited with my twin sister Miriam. For the following 2 weeks, I have only one clear memory: crawling on the barrack floor because I no longer could walk, and crawling to reach a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack. And as I was crawling, I would fade out in and out of consciousness, telling myself, I must survive, I must survive. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I felt immediately a lot stronger. It took me another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal. Miriam, when I got back, she was sitting on the bed, staring into space. When I asked her what happened to you, she said, I cannot talk about it. I will not talk about it. And we didn't talk about Auschwitz until 1985. When I asked her in 85, Miriam, do you remember when I was taken to the hospital? She said, yes. I said, what happened to you while I was in the hospital? She said, I was under Nazi doctor supervision 24 hours a day. It was the same 2 weeks that Mengele said I would die. So I said to them, what happened to you after the 2 weeks were up? She said she was taken back to the labs, injected with many injections that made her feel very sick. As we found out years later, when she grew up, got married in Israel, expected her first child, she developed severe kidney infections that did not respond to any antibiotic. Second pregnancy in 1963, the infection got so bad that the Israeli doctors studied her, and they found out that Miriam's kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child.
Have you ever used orphans to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Have you ever used the mentally handicapped to study an experimental vaccine?
I don't recollect ever doing studies in mentally handicapped individuals. At the time, in the 1960s, it was not an uncommon practice. I wouldn't deny that I may have done so.
There's an article entitled Attenuation of RA-27-3 Rubella Virus in WI38 Human Diploid Cells. Are you familiar with that article?
Yes.
13 seronegative, mentally retarded children were given RA-27-3 vaccine.
Okay, well, that's in that case, that's what I did.
Okay. Have you ever expressed that it's better to perform experiments on those less likely to be able to contribute to society, such as children with handicap, than with children without or adults without handicaps?
I don't remember specifically, but it's possible.
This is one of the things you wrote. The question is whether we are to have experiments performed on fully functioning adults and on children who are potentially contributors to society, or to perform initial studies in children and adults who are human in form but not in social potential.
Yes.
Okay. It may be objected that this question implies a Nazi philosophy, but I do not think that it is difficult to distinguish non-functioning persons from members of ethnic, racial, economic, or other groups.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever used babies of mothers in prison to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Have you ever used individuals under colonial rule to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Did you do so in the Belgian Congo?
Yes.
Did that experiment involve almost 1 million